Hey, it's Frank.
And Anthony.
We're with Rodeo Rewind, and Anthony arranged for a awesome interview this morning. Anthony, who did we interview?
We had a chance to interview Miss Gail Hughbanks Woerner, and this was a great interview. She's one of the most important rodeo historians of all time, in our opinion. One of the most important. And
I agree. She's super important, right? How many books has she written?
She's written 6, and she's writing her 7th right now.
Yeah, so the book that really got you interested was about what topic?
We read and talked to her about her book, Fearless Funny. We had a chance to talk to one of our friends.
Yep.
Rob Gann.
Yep, Rob. What's Rob do, so people know?
He's a barrel man, and so we talked to him about who he looked up to in his industry and who inspired him in this industry.
Yeah, we thought that was a good question, kind of to lead into, match up with Ms. Gail's interview.
Right.
So,
yeah,
it was good. Anything else you got to share?
Let's go look at what Rob said.
Let's go look at what Rob said.
Well, when I was a kid, there was a guy named John Gilstrap, and he had a bull, Brammer bull, Bubba, and he'd done a lot of rodeos in my country and would come stay at my house, and I thought John Gilstrap was the funniest guy ever. And later on in life, and at this time I didn't plan on being a clown, so I didn't really study them like I should have, but when I started wanting to study clowns, Bill McInerney was my hero, and I thought he was as good as there was. The only thing is, he was hair-lipped, and he could use that to his advantage, and I can't. But his showmanship was out of this world. And so he would probably be the guy that inspired me the most. In fact, the baggies I have on tonight is the last pair of baggies Bill used to wear when he was clowning. He gave them to me. So occasionally I'll wear them kind of as a little tribute to Bill McInerney.
That's pretty awesome.
Yes, sir.
Our first question is, so we're here to talk to you about your writing and more specifically your book, Fearless Funny Man. Can you quickly give us like a summary of the book?
Well, the book is the history of the rodeo clown, how it started, and when I knew George Doak, who was a very well-known funny man, rodeo clown, bullfighter, and he had told me some things about his career, and I felt like they had not been given a lot of credit all the time in rodeo because they get a salary, of course, but they have to make their own plans. And so I asked every clown, every bullfighter, everybody that I could meet what they knew about the history, and nobody knew anything. Mm-hmm. So it took me 6 years. It took me 6 years to put that book together. And I went all over the country. I interviewed, the first time I interviewed them at Cheyenne, and they had the world champion bullfights at night at Cheyenne at that time. It was in the mid-'80s, I guess. And so anyway, I asked the stupidest questions, I'm sure, but in time I got to know, a lot of clowns and ask a lot of the questions and everything, and it's the history, and the history is so different. I'm sure you know, if you've read my book, that in the beginning they were only funny men. Mm-hmm. They didn't do any bullfighting because they weren't using Brahma bulls or any bulls that in the bull riding at many places was an exhibition and not even an event. Mm-hmm. And they used anything with horns. They used cows, bulls, steers. Yes, sir. Nancy.
That was one of the interesting parts that I thought, that was like the first thing in your book that I thought was like the most interesting, that they used anything.
And the person putting on the rodeo would sometimes even pay cowboys. I'll pay you $1 if you'll get on that bull and ride it, or that cow and ride it. And I think it was used to show the audience that cowboys could ride anything. Mm-hmm. That's just a real simple thing. But let me go back a little bit. The reason that there was even a rodeo clown there is when they first started charging money, they would have to fix a fence or fix a chute or maybe, something happened, the cowboy got knocked out and he'd be lying in the arena and they just stopped the rodeo. And the producer of the rodeo saw his fans leaving because they got bored. And so he grabbed a cowboy and said, get out there and do something to keep those people in their seats. Yeah. And there were some cowboys that had fun doing it. And so the cowboys that liked to do that started thinking up funny things to do, funny, little crazy antics, and it worked. And so all of a sudden, after a few years, you didn't have a rodeo without a rodeo clown. And he was just a buffoon, a funny man, somebody who made a fool of himself, act silly in front of the audience.
It was just so fun reading the book, and but one of the first, Anthony's like, we have to come up with some questions. I remember Anthony writing books when he was little. I've always loved reading books and magazine articles. But what made you decide to write your first book?
When did I decide to write my first book?
Or what made you decide to do it?
Well, my first book was not a rodeo book. My first book was on my home community. I grew up on a ranch in northeastern Colorado, and there was a new reporter, probably right out of journalism school in college, that came to the county seat, and he went around to the little towns in the county, and he would write an article about them. Well, I come from Willard. Willard doesn't exist anymore. Willard in its heyday was not over 120 people, but it served their purpose. It was built for homesteaders by the railroad. And it served its purpose, and it died. And he wrote a very negative article about it. Rundown 1930s tractor, buildings without paint, and everything that you could think of that was negative about my little town. And my mother, who still lived there, I lived in Texas, but she was offended, wrote the editor and said she did not appreciate that. And he printed her little letter, and my mother was very quiet and very seldom ever said anything to anybody. So I got curious about where I'd been raised, and I researched it and wrote a book on it. You write books because you have something to say and you want to make it right. And I wrote a book on Willard, Colorado, A Special Place in Time. And since then, because of my book, there's been a documentary about this little tiny town built by the Burlington Railroad for homesteaders up in Colorado. So it was worth it.
Well, thank you.
My second book was Fearless Funny Men, and that was because of my friend George Doak and what he told me, and I was so curious, and the book was so well received by the rodeo world, I decided, well, I'll write another book. And that's when I wrote Belly Full of Bed Springs, The History of Bronc Riding. And so now I have, I'm just about to get my barrel racing history book out.
Excellent.
And,
I know Anthony wants to read that.
Well, it's coming along. We haven't got it completely out yet, but it will be. My publisher hopes to have it out before the end of the year.
Well, we'll order it from you direct. Maybe we could get a signed copy.
Thank you.
Anthony.
And then, so, what's your favorite story from the book Fearless Funny Men?
Well, that's hard, because I didn't put anything in the book that I didn't think would be appreciated. But I think the one that I got the biggest kick out of, and it only happens, probably once, is when Fess Reynolds decided to have. Fess Reynolds was a rodeo clown, bullfighter, but he was so good with animals. He could he was an animal whisperer, and he decided to have a zebra act, and he actually bought 4 zebras. And in going across Arizona, he was going back to his home in California, and I think he bought them on the East Coast. And the trailer got opened, and they ran away. and he had to collect those on the desert in Arizona.
Ooh.
That is, one of the most unusual. It ended up he only got, I think, one. He got two back, I think, at the end of it. One got hit by a car later, and one of them just, completely just disappeared. But anyway, the book, it's on page 60 and 61 in the book. And but there's just stories all throughout. And that I guess I would say that's one of the ones I like the best. Okay?
I was impressed with how much effort, time, and work and commitment to being excellent at what they did these guys put in.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it was amazing to read about, like, how, I mean, they thought about it, they planned, they prepared. It was amazing to, I think that's a huge lesson right there to people, like, like, if you want to be good, I don't care what you're doing, you have to really commit to it. And these guys committed to being great at what they did.
Oh, they did. Even in the very beginning, they were always trying to figure out something new and exciting to entertain the audience with. And of course, then when bullfighting, when the bull rider, they started using the Brahmas in the bull riding event, and the producer turned around and said, okay, you get out there in front of the chute and you distract the bull so the rider can get to the fence or get to safety. And, I'm sure the clown looked at him like, have you lost your mind? I'm a funny man. I make fun of myself. You want me to do what? And it worked. It's one of the most, I'll use a big word, paradoxical profession I have ever known. I can't think of anything more diverse than a rodeo clown being a buffoon, making fun of himself, and then when the bull riding comes, he's got to be out there and be a hero and save those guys. And and of course now, Anthony, your funny men are funny men, and your bullfighters are bullfighters. It's just like every other profession in the world. Everybody's become a specialist.
Yeah. Right.
So. And that happened in the late 50s, early 60s, and it happened with one man. And that's Wick Peth. And Wick came in, and he was good. His family did sell a lot of Brahmas up in the state of Washington. And he watched him from the time he was a teenager until he was out of school, and he became a bullfighter, but he wasn't funny. But he had to have acts. And the announcer was always telling him, you're about as funny as a funeral in the rain. And so finally, he was so good that the producers would hire him without having acts, without being the funny man. And once that happened, you had all these young guys that admired what he did and didn't have to be funny. And now we've got an overabundance of bullfighters. And just think about it. They can hop on a commercial airplane and check their suitcase, and they don't have to haul all kinds of animals and props and things like that like the funny man does. Right. But there you go.
I have a question.
So, what's one of your book? What's the best book recommendation of yours for our viewers?
Say it again.
So, if you want to recommend a book for our viewers, which one would it be of yours?
Any of my books. It depends on what the viewer is interested in. If he is interested in the timed events, I think my roping book.
Yeah, I want to read that one. Too.
Yeah, the rope to win. Cowboy Up is the bull riding book.
We have that one.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And any of my books, I do a lot of research. I have got to get it completed, and I work on them for years. I can't get anything out in a short period of time. I think probably the one you're reading now, the Birth of Professional Rodeo. that one is probably the one I got out in the shortest amount of time because the 75th anniversary of it was coming up, and I wanted to have a book for it.
It's a great book. It is a really good book.
Well, it's so important because before that, the actual rodeo cowboy had no say.
Mm-hmm.
He could tell somebody what he thought.
Yep.
But the producers all knew that the cowboys that rodeoed, and just think of this now, a guy became, back in the early days, became a cowboy because he had skills of either breaking horses, roping, taking care of cattle, that sort of thing, and he was on a ranch. And a lot of times those cowboys were put up in the high country or back in a remote area, and they never saw a person for a month or more. How boring is that? And especially if you're by yourself.
Yeah.
And so when rodeo came along, using the skills that those cowboys had gotten,
mm-hmm.
because of what they did every day on the ranch, they loved it because they got to go to different towns, they got to meet and be with people, and they found out, they may have gotten $30 a month on the ranch, and they could win that if they were good enough in one day. So,
yeah.
Another good day.
So that was a great day. We'll see you next week because we got to do a part 2 to
Miss Gail. But thank you to her for sure. And thanks Gail
Rob.
and Rob Gann. Thank you very much for being part of that video.
Yep.
Right. See you next week. Tuesday. Like and subscribe would be greatly appreciated.